Okay, we're going to get started. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending upon your time zone. My name is Nisha Patel. I'm the Executive Director of the U.S. Partnership on Mobility from Poverty. And we're excited to bring you today's webinar. We have over 300 people registered and an incredibly diverse group of participants. We've got folks from all over the country, people working in higher ed, in community colleges, community-based nonprofit organizations, higher education associations, workforce associations, human services agencies. So we're delighted to bring you today's webinar and conversation with Cheryl Hyman. And a little bit of background about the U.S. Partnership on Mobility from Poverty. We are an initiative funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and we are staffed and supported by the Urban Institute based here in D.C. And our partnership is a collaboration of 24 diverse and dynamic leaders who the Gates Foundation has tasked with answering the following question: what would it take to substantially increase mobility from poverty? And so that is a question that we wrestle with every day, and Cheryl Hyman is one of our partners. She's one of those 24 dynamic leaders. And I have had the privilege of getting to know her over the past year, and let me tell you, she is a rock star. She is a warrior for economic mobility, and I'm so pleased that she has agreed to join us today. As Chancellor of City Colleges of Chicago, Cheryl has led a restructuring, and I would say really a reimagining of a system that serves more than 90,000 students. And that reimagining is the focus of our webinar today: realizing community colleges' potential and ensuring a path to the middle class. Cheryl brings a rare and unique perspective to her leadership role. Not only does she bring rigorous analysis and a private industry lens to her work, which I think is sometimes rare among community college presidents and in higher ed, but she also brings something that I personally think is even more important. She brings the lived experience of someone who began her academic career as a student in the very system that she now leads. Cheryl is Chicago through and through. We were talking earlier about how, people say this about New York, but I really think it's true of Chicago. If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. And Cheryl is a graduate of Olive Harvey College, which is part of the City Colleges of Chicago system, which she now leads. She earned a BA in computer science from the Illinois Institute of Technology, an MA in community development from North Park University, and an executive MBA from Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management. So Cheryl has brought so much to the table in our partnership conversations. And within our partnership, she's been a leader really pushing our thinking on how to leverage community college systems to improve student outcomes, not just for completion of credentials, which is a big part of the community college reform agenda, but also for access to in-demand jobs in partnership with employers that really help to put people on pathways to economic mobility. So I'll just make a few housekeeping notes before we begin. The webinar is being recorded, and a video with Cheryl's presentation will go live on our website, mobilitypartnership.org, later this week, and we'll also be sending a link around to all of the participants within the next couple of days. So for while Cheryl is going to give her presentation, participants will be muted, and then we will have a Q&A after the presentation. So please send us your questions. You should see on your screen a graphic of the questions box. So that's in your webinar interface, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can after Cheryl concludes her presentation. And so with that, I welcome Cheryl.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so very sorry for that technical difficulty. I do apologize. Not sure what happened there, but we're up and running now. Thank you, Nisha, and for that very warm introduction, and also thanks Lionel, who also played a big part in arranging this. And again, a very warm thank you to everybody for tuning in today. As we all know, there are many pressing social issues today, but I contend that how we educate and train our workforce is among the most critical to creating a path out of poverty and into the middle class for millions of Americans. I would like to start with some facts that I find to be telling about the role of higher education in the U.S. today. According to the Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce, by 2020, 2/3 of all jobs will require at least some post-secondary education. In fact, the new baseline in education today is no longer K through 12, but K through 14. A post-secondary credential is required to secure a family-sustaining job in today's labor market. Just as our students need post-secondary education to seize career opportunities, employers need our students equipped with the skills to power and reimagine their increasingly technical and global operations. At recent rates of degree attainment, the U.S. will be short about 5 million workers with post-secondary education by 2020. Some U.S. colleges have proven they can change even the poorest students' income bracket and life trajectory. In a recent study, about 16% of the lowest income students attending college in the U.S. were able to reach the top 20% of earners by their mid-30s, compared with only 4% of those students who didn't attend college. Community colleges in particular help to move more than a quarter of students from the bottom 20% of the income scale into the middle 20%, a rate on par with regional public universities. But this is not enough. If we are to meet the labor market's demand for skills and our students' need for family-sustaining careers, we must ensure higher education fulfills its promise for all students. I will speak today specifically about two-year public community colleges because that is where I've served in the trenches for the last 7 years. Community colleges serve nearly 6 million undergraduate students, or about 30% of all 2- and 4-year college students in fall 2016. These students are often minority, slightly older than 4-year college goers, and many are the first in their family to attend college, often while balancing work and family responsibilities. At a time when the average 4-year public college costs more than $9,000 for in-state students, and the average 4-year private college costs more than $30,000, a 2-year community college at more than $3,000 per year is 1/3 to 1/10 of those costs. Because of this, community college is for some students the only path to earn a degree without all the debt, and the only path to the middle class. While community colleges play a key role in catapulting students into higher education or giving students access to college, they still must address student success and ensure that every student completes his or her program and moves on to further college and careers in a timely manner. The average rate of completion within 3 years at public community colleges nationwide is a humble 21%. Even when you afford students double the time to complete and account for transfers to 4-year colleges, the rate is still 39%. Too many colleges post low to middling completion rates, too often leaving students with some credits but no degree, and equally detrimental, a degree that doesn't equip them with the skills employers demand. Given the importance of these institutions, community colleges must work for all students. Today, I will discuss some of the common challenges facing the community college sector and will make the case for comprehensive community college reform using as an example the reinvention effort I undertook at City Colleges of Chicago, an institution that Nisha mentioned, is where I'm a proud alum and which I've run for the last 7 years. At City Colleges, our 5,000 plus faculty and staff serve more than 90,000 students each year across 7 colleges. About half of our students receive financial aid. Minority students make up more than 2/3 of the student body, and the average age is 26. When I arrived 7 years ago, City Colleges found itself at a critical crossroad. The institution had a long history of access, but not the same strong focus or track record on student success. There had been very little strategy and no clearly articulated goals, and so it was impossible to target investments and to hold ourselves accountable either operationally or academically. Our challenges were system-wide. It was not sufficient to confront one or two issues at a time. They demanded that our institution make a complete cultural shift. This meant rethinking who and how we hire, how we hold people accountable, what programs we offer, how we structure those programs, how we support our students, and how we attend to operational needs. We needed to adjust all these levers to usher in a new culture focused on both access and student success that uses data to inform decision-making and that prioritizes accountability and transparency to achieve scalable, sustainable solutions. We were not trying to solve a problem here or there. We developed a reinvention model that makes continuous improvement inevitable. This shift required changing the culture externally just as much as internally, away from an unproductive legacy under which City Colleges was all things to all people without any validation of demand or effectiveness, and we had to stress to external stakeholders that our agenda was going to be academic, not political. Once we outlined a vision of a student success culture, I advanced simple, quantifiable goals by which we could measure ourselves, from the number of relevant credentials earned to transfer rate, from remedial transitions to adult education transitions. We included job placement, earnings, and operational targets. Our team developed a 5-year plan with yearly goals, and we released annual scorecards to track our progress. We built a structure to carry out our reform model. I am a big believer that those closest to the problems often have the insight needed to solve them. I was committed to reinvention being a collaborative effort. We set up task forces of faculty, staff, students, and external advisory groups of academic, community, and business stakeholders to document what they thought were the biggest issues and make recommendations for solutions. In all, 20% of full-time faculty members served, and task forces have accounted for 210,000 people hours since the beginning of reinvention. Talent is one area where community colleges must reconsider their traditions. Reform-minded community colleges must build leadership teams with backgrounds and change management who are willing and able to make unpopular decisions when necessary. I brought on a leadership team that was a partnership of academic experts and others who, like me, came from industry with experience in result-driven organizations. We had to let people at City Colleges know we were serious about delivering outcomes and make sure everyone was on the hook for doing their share of the work. In addition to changing the job descriptions of the board, myself, and our presidents to reflect our new goals, we introduced student success pay into 2 key contracts with our full-time faculty and our adult educators, replacing retention pay with pay for performance. With the goals, structure, and accountability system set, we used the work of our reinvention task forces to flesh out strategies that would shift our paradigm to focus on student success. When I arrived, few either inside or outside the institution knew the graduation rate was 7%. And some people refused to believe it when I told them. It became evident that a leading reason for the low graduation rate was that we did not have clear and relevant structured pathways to graduation, and that we had too few support systems to get students to completion. It was also clear we were not living up to our obligation to taxpayers to manage their dollars responsibly, to free up funds to put in place the kind of academic systems that would drive student success. The four primary strategies of reinvention then became increasing the relevance of our programs to the labor market, reducing the time to completion by creating clear structures for students to navigate, bolstering student supports, and improving operational performance. But it all starts with program relevance. When I became chancellor, colleagues in higher education and partners in industry told me what we taught at City Colleges was out of step with what their admissions officers and HR teams looked for. What I came to quickly conclude was that if higher education is going to more fully live up to its mission and its obligation to taxpayers, it needs to be more in tune with the real world. Not surprisingly, students already know this. In 2015, in UCLA's American Freshman Survey, the top reason freshmen listed for going to college was to be able to get a job. We should measure our success as a community college sector by whether students are entering good careers and how well we prepare them to do that. The Association of American Colleges and Universities asks graduates and employers whether graduates were ready for the workplace in various skills areas. 59% of students felt they were good at applying their knowledge and skills in the real world, while only 23% of employers agreed. The lesson is that we have to challenge students to understand the skills the real world wants from them and how to get those skills, and community colleges must listen to and revamp our programs to reflect those skill sets. We hear a lot about the skills gap in America, and it is very real. But there is also an information gap. City Colleges of Chicago's College to Careers initiative has been cited as a model of how we can close both those gaps. Under College to Careers, each of our 7 colleges became a center of excellence for high-growth industry, which has allowed us to pool our talent and resources and has facilitated the involvement of partners in a much more impactful way. Today, we have 200 education and employer partnerships that have helped us ensure the relevance of our credentials, helped us revamp our programs, and redesign our infrastructure to prepare students for high-tech work environments that reward critical thinking and problem solving. The College to Careers model has been criticized by some as a move to vocational training, which I think suggests a misunderstanding of today's labor market demands. A focus on transfer and career readiness are increasingly one and the same today. There is no either or, especially with a system of stackable credentials that build upon each other and allow students to earn marketable credentials as they advance their education. Because we know the longer it takes our students to complete, the less likely they are to do so, our second strategy has been to reduce the time it takes our students to move through our system by increasing program structure. We have asked our students to shift their mindsets from thinking about selecting courses to beginning with a strategic decision about their career interests and 2- and 4-year goals, and then considering the programs and courses that follow. We created relevant semester-by-semester academic pathways tied to a career goal, and today 100% of City Colleges students are on such a pathway. Our third strategy has been to ensure our students are supported along their path to completion, so we have significantly increased student support, adding career and transfer centers, wellness centers, veteran centers, tutoring, intrusive advising, and an early alert system. We brought our student advisor ratio down from more than 900 students to 1 advisor, which was twice the national average, to less than 300 to 1, well below the national average. Our fourth and final strategy has been to ensure efficient operations. I believe a college system is, when it boils right down to it, in the business of educating, and it should be operated just as efficiently as a business would be. We have made it a point of looking first within our institution for the resources to do our work before looking elsewhere. We have successfully negotiated 14 collective bargaining agreements, ushering in new group incentives for instructors and faculty unions that include student success pay for faculty members based on performance against student outcomes in our 5-year plan. We achieved all this while the state of Illinois cut us $70 million in the last 2 years alone. We have been able to manage through this crisis, albeit with many sacrifices, because we saved $70 million through increased efficiency, securing a AA and AA minus credit ratings along the way. As a result of all this work, in the last 3 years, we have awarded more than 14,000 degrees compared to 6,000 degrees in the 3 years preceding reinvention. The number of degrees awarded annually to both full-time and part-time students, regardless how long it takes them to graduate, has more than doubled, from about 2,000 before reinvention to more than 5,000 today. In addition, our federally defined graduation rate for first-time full-time students who graduate within 3 years also has more than doubled, from 7% to 17%, again the highest in City Colleges history. Now, some people point out that we are still short of the 20% national average graduation rate for community college. I would argue that neither number is a reason to celebrate or rest, because both are unacceptable and we still have a lot of work to do. Our transfer rate is up, and we have seen more than 3,000 students secure paid internships and jobs through College to Careers. We have created new program pathways validated by employers and four-year college partners in logistics, health information management, insurance, computer networking, and much more. In healthcare, for instance, we went from 6 largely underachieving, mostly unaccredited nursing programs to 1 City Colleges School of Nursing at the new Malcolm X College, what a nursing licensure pass rate has gone from 42% in 2010 to more than 90% today, and where for the very first time, every nursing student is now attending a nationally accredited program. The number of GED and English as a second language students who advance to college credit certificate or degree work has increased more than 200%. Despite these successes, or perhaps because of them, I have become acutely aware of some of the systematic obstacles to comprehensive cultural change within community colleges. These are challenges that the whole sector must address collectively if we are to move the needle for all students, including addressing an accreditation process that seeks to measure quality but places limited emphasis on workforce relevance. The challenge of attracting and retaining talent with a mix of skills to manage complex reform efforts. A lack of awareness of the centrality of operational reforms that have only become more important as community colleges face increasing pressures from declining state funding. But I would contend the biggest challenge comes from the need for a bold vision and the political will to shift the community college paradigm to a culture of success and accountability, regardless of pushback and regardless of the personal cost to leaders. Throughout City Colleges Reinvention, I have encountered my fair share of protests by faculty, staff, and students, negative press and hate blogs, and angry calls by elected officials and other powerful people. This happened when we first shared the 7% graduation rate, when we closed nursing programs for poor performance, when I changed the job descriptions of our college presidents and asked them to reapply for their jobs, when we began to concentrate college to careers programs, and even when we created a week between the end of registration and the start of classes so that students would start to be better prepared. While reinvention has delivered results, the pushback returns when tough decisions are made. At the end of the day, our reinvention has been about facing reality, facing what employers demand, facing what universities expect, facing our fears of change, facing the challenges of pushing outside of our comfort zone, and facing the reality of our resources. In city colleges and at community colleges across our country, the path of most resistance is the one that holds the greatest rewards. So I challenge community colleges to embark upon comprehensive cultural change as the future of our country, our economy, and our students seeking their rightful place in the middle class depends upon it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cheryl, for that fantastic presentation. I'm just inspired anytime I get a chance to share a phone line or a conference session with Cheryl. So that's just, it's fantastic. I've had a chance to hear this story before, but I know it's new for many people, and I think it really showcases how much leadership matters when you're trying to implement change under what can be very, very tough conditions. So I want to encourage you all to continue to send questions in using the webinar interface. We've already received a few questions, and I'm going to kick off with a couple questions we've gotten here internally at the Urban Institute and some moderator questions, and then we'll be taking your questions as they come in. And so, Cheryl, I wanted to actually start out with this theme of leadership, because I know it's been so important for the reinvention effort. And I love what you said, that the path of most resistance holds the greatest rewards. And given the diversity of folks that we have joining us on the webinar today, you know, we have people working at different levels. They may not be the president or the chancellor in a higher ed institution or an association that's working with institutions, but they may, you know, hear some of the things you've said, and they're the kinds of reforms they'd like to see in their institutions. What advice might you give them if what they want to do is to go to their president or their chancellor with this kind of change agenda? What were the kinds of arguments that you think would be successful in making the case for reform to someone in that very senior leadership role?
Data and facts. I think a lot of times when we're presenting our arguments, they lack the necessary data and facts, and I think it's just that simple. You know, many people didn't like hearing me talk about the 7% graduation rate, and as I said, many people didn't believe it, but it was hard to argue that you shouldn't do anything about it, and no one could prove that it was any higher. And so if a need usually comes from some sort of data, some sort of fact, use that data, use those facts. They are very powerful and very strong, and I would highly suggest that we use more data and facts as we make our cases for change.
Great, thank you. And data and facts, something that I feel like we don't always have enough of today. So it's good to know that there are leaders out there who still rely on them. Another topic I wanted to ask about, you mentioned an impressive number when you talked about partnerships. You said that you had over 200 partnerships with education and employers. And actually, we have a question from one of our webinar participants, Justin Collinger, who asks, so he also says, you mentioned 200 partnerships with industry and colleges. How have you changed your structure or processes to make industry partnerships sustainable over time?
Right. I think that's a very good question. First, let me say this. It was very easy to get them involved because, one, they had been screaming in this city for us to build more public-private partnerships because they have a huge need to fill, and Chicago does a great job with partnering up its civic and business community. But I can tell everybody that It won't be hard to get them involved, but you do have to set up a structure that makes it easy for them to navigate. Employers don't want to deal with a lot of bureaucracy. They have enough of that to deal with on their own. They need to have a seat at the table and be engaged because they know what they need, and your institution knows how to deliver that. And so you have to make that a seamless process for them. I think we did that when we created our centers of excellence. So I'll go back to using our nursing program. So before we had 6 nursing programs spread across our district. Imagine if we had our healthcare industry partners traveling or communicating with 6 different colleges in 6 different ways. They just will not deal with that. Plus, you won't get consistent quality or the quality that you need. So our college to careers focus, creating those centers of excellence, has allowed us to have a structure by which partners can easily navigate and get involved. And so now, our healthcare partners, for instance, are working with our healthcare faculty in that new Malcolm X College, and they serve as an advisory. They help them with curriculum. Our faculty get very much involved with the employers. So you have to have a seamless structure by which they have a real voice, can be involved, can work hand in hand with the faculty and administrators, and eliminate a lot of the bureaucracy that they have to deal with on their own.
Thank you, Cheryl. That was a great answer. And I know that the employer engagement is a huge topic of interest around the country, and particularly with our audience. We've got a lot of workforce folks on the call today. So we have another question from Daryl Tindorf, who's a visiting professor at Aurora University. And he says that he agrees with you about the impact of community colleges on poverty, and he's done research that has been published on the impact of community colleges on economic growth in developed and developing countries, and currently measuring the global impact on income disparity. And he says that in his research, it has become common that there is a negative stigma of community colleges.
Yep.
And so he asks, how do we find a way to change the negative stigma of community colleges? And he says he thinks that needs to start at the high school levels and maybe with high school counselors.
Oh my God, I couldn't agree with him more. That is so absolutely true. I talk about this a lot. And, one of the saddest moments in my tenure is when I first started and I was visiting with a student group, and this student looked at me, and I knew this student was incredibly smart, coming here, giving this institution everything they had, and they looked at me and said, what can you do to help us change the reputation? When we go out, when we go places and we say that we're going to community colleges, people just kind of turn their head. That was heartbreaking for me, knowing that this is where I got my start and how valuable of an asset. I think one, it should change and can change at the high school level. That's why we've partnered very much with our public school system here, and we've, tripled our dual credit, dual enrollment to get students introduced to it first. However, that reputation is something we're still trying to work through, and I think community colleges control that. We control our reputation. We have to have those employers engaged. We have to show true outcomes. We have to show relevancy in our programs. We have to show how we are tied to the economy and how the jobs that are out there today, we have to let everybody know that this is the battleground for today and tomorrow's workforce. But we have to live up to that and change. We cannot be seen as, remedial institutions or the place where, people go when they just can't make it anyplace else. It's up to us to change that, and that's why this type of reform is so important. We have to start aligning our curriculum. We have to get more in tune with the real world. We have to start involving employers, and we have to show the world that this is our purpose. And we have to start working, I absolutely agree, with our K through 12 institutions to start what I call reverse engineering our programs very early on, helping students make career choices earlier and then helping them find affordable transition options. And we have to take advantage of the alumni like me who went on to become very successful and tell more of those stories. So there's many things we have to do, but it starts with community colleges owning their responsibility and how they contribute to changing the negative stereotype of community colleges.
Thank you, Cheryl. And as Cheryl knows, one of the things that we've been spending a lot of time on in our partnership is really talking about the importance of changing the narrative about poverty and how we talk about people in poverty. And I think perhaps that extends to how we reframe the way people think about community colleges as well. So another question actually comes to us from our colleague here at the Urban Institute, Matt Chingos. So you had a great slide in your presentation, Cheryl, where you talked about the affordability of community colleges versus some other kinds of institutions, and you also talked about some of the budget pressures that you were successfully able to navigate. And Matt is posing a question about sort of overall limited resources for higher education. If policymakers are making tough choices about how to prioritize to the extent that there is increased spending, should it go to, and maybe it doesn't have to be either or, but curious what you think, to provide more academic, non-academic supports? Or, tuition is some would argue is already pretty affordable, or spend the money on academic and non-academic supports, or spend the money on tuition reductions to make the cost even more affordable. What are your thoughts on that?
Thanks, Matt, by the way, for that question. I don't think this is an either-or scenario. First, about additional funding. I personally have challenged our institution, and I challenge all community colleges to find more savings within their own system first before seeking additional funding. And I think having a strategic plan allows you to target your resources. It makes it easier for you to advocate for additional funding when you can show that you're being as efficient as possible, when you can show how you are investing the current money and resources that you have, and then the outcomes that come from that. So I challenge us to do that first. However, disinvestment in community colleges at the state level has become pervasive and is, I think, potentially damaging to the sector's progress. So while I would not focus necessarily on increased spending unless tied to outcomes, level spending is more a necessary goal. Now we're just fighting for level spending. As for affordability, as I mentioned, community colleges remain the most cost-effective higher education model, and I think by re-examining community colleges' own spending and making cuts wherever possible, as well as requiring states to do their fair share, that is a strong start to continued affordability. But I think I have to stress this. It's hard to go to policymakers, given what's happening in a lot of states, and advocate your cause without showing some strategic plan and where your investments are going. There's more and more pressure for that. It's getting harder and harder just to go to states and state policymakers and say, hey, invest in us. We're community colleges. We do good for all. You have to now start being very strategic and have a strategic plan. Where you choose to spend that and where that investment goes, I think, is very much dependent on the institution and the institutional needs based on some long-term strategic plan.
Great, thank you, Cheryl. So another question here, going back to the industry partnerships that we talked about before, and this question comes from Jaime Munoz at Orange County Social Services Agency, West Coast question. Did the industry partnerships result in the creation of any new apprenticeship or apprenticeship-like opportunities?
Oh yeah, they resulted in a ton of new opportunities. But they also, and I'll go back to that, but they also resulted in the elimination of quite a few programs, which, probably added to some of my fan mail. Because as I said, a lot of things we were teaching was somewhat out of step. And I'll give you an example of that. When coming from a computer science background at one point in my life, when I first started at City Colleges, I found that we were still teaching Fortran. So you can understand how that may have made me feel. But then there was a lot of that. So we, through our employer partnerships, when we did an 18-month study to first figure out which sectors were growing the most in our region. Once we figured that out, we then looked at which particular jobs within those sectors were growing. And then once we figured that out, we looked at where our strengths were within the job growth, because, again, we can't train for everything. We then validated that with our employer partners, who then came in and helped us see where we may have missed a few, helped us revamp our curriculum, and that revamping actually resulted in a lot of additional credentials that we were not offering or may not have been offering before. So it resulted in the elimination of a lot of things that we were out of step with. It resulted in revamping a lot of our current curriculum, and it also resulted in the creation of a lot of new programs and curriculum.
Great, thank you, Cheryl. So the questions are just rolling in, so we're going to try to get through as many as we can. But you just mentioned, and you mentioned in your presentation, Cheryl, that not everybody was a fan of all this reinvention, and you even to the point where there was some hate mail and hate blogs. And so the question from David Hurtado, who asked, so he says, you've had incredible results. It's hard to believe that City College faculty are not supporting the change. So, and he's asking, so what's the key to get more faculty to buy in to get even more growth?
So I think the key to addressing any kind of pushback is to, one, stay focused on your goal, the goal that you're trying to achieve, to align around those goals, and try as best you can to explain how the strategies and tactics are helping to meet those goals. A lot of times people change and they just start changing, and the change is not clearly articulated or understood. So I think staying focused on that goal, try as best you can to clearly articulate that and get people to understand why. But I also think the big key is getting faculty involved in the reform effort is key to developing buy-in and understanding. So getting the faculty, getting your staff, getting students involved is very much key. And then understanding change is constant. So you have to find a way to keep them constantly involved, not doing the flavors of the month. This education and participation just must be ongoing. But also realize this is so very important. You won't ever satisfy everyone. So you have to, at some point, decide how much progress you want to compromise for consensus.
Okay, we have actually a follow-up question that relates to kind of building buy-in, so from faculty but also from other constituencies. So Andrea Juncos from Jobs for the Future is asking about if you could talk about the process of shifting the student advisor ratio from 900 to 1 to 300 to 1, which is that's a huge change. And she wants to know what data or facts, because you talked about those. So what data or facts did you use to get buy-in and make that happen?
Well, that was ironically one of the easier ones. There was very little pushback on getting more advisors. I mean, the few that we had was overwhelmed. We had people in administrative roles trying to be advisors. I mean, that was one that everybody actually applauded. Like, there was no way that you could, properly advise a student if one advisor is responsible for 900 students. I mean, everybody was so overwhelmed with that. So there was very little that I had to do to get buy-in on that. But I can tell you this about it. A lot of times when you're addressing change, people talk a lot about going after the low-hanging fruit. You know, that's a great cliche, but a lot of times that does really work in change. Find out where people have their biggest pressures, and try to alleviate some of those pressures if, in fact, you know that will help your student success agenda. So that was one of the areas that, you know, I got very little pushback with.
So Cheryl, on that, I have a follow-up question. I was wondering, on that, the ratio change for the students, did you get specific, have you heard positive feedback from students on that? Have you seen a difference in sort of their response?
Oh, yes. I have heard students say, quote, to me that, you know, this should have happened sooner, about pathways. Why didn't pathways happen much sooner? The advisors are, you know, they can advise much better now in a much more targeted way. They can actually track their students better. But let me say something about our advising model. It goes a little bit deeper than just the number two. We have very much segmented even our advisors to be more in line with our strategic plan. So we have completion advisors, we have first year advisors. So even our advisors are very much segmented to be in line with helping our students succeed. And we also do kind of caseload so that students have a constant advisor the entire time. So we have even various models within that advising structure.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to keep rolling along. So the questions are just very popular, Cheryl. Lots of questions pouring in, and we've got a number of different questions. I think building on the partnerships theme and thinking sort of beyond what you offer at City College, what other nonprofits and what role nonprofits can play. And in particular, we have a question from Frank Santoni with Catholic Charities in Fort Worth in Texas. And he asks about whether you can share insights about the role of supportive services for students that address some of the non-academic barriers.
Oh, yeah. So let me address that last one first. So that, because it's so key, I think a lot of times we think about you know, what's holding them back academically, while recognizing the non-academic issues that they may deal with. But we need to do more than recognize it. We need to add some support structure around it. Many of our students are dealing with so many social and emotional issues that it affects their academics no matter what support systems we put in place. And so to address that, one of the things you heard me say in my remarks is that we put in wellness centers in every single one of our campuses. And those wellness centers are staffed with trained graduates who, you know, help students deal with social and emotional issues. And we very much partner with, this goes into kind of the second part of the question, we very much partner with our local surrounding nonprofits and other support and government and public entities to help provide them resources to get them help in areas where we may not be the best help for them. And so these wellness centers have seen a tremendous amount of success, and I believe they have very much played a role in helping us help our students with our success agenda. So our nonprofits have really been helping us address those social, emotional needs that we are not able to address. But another area where I think our nonprofits have played a big role is in our adult education area. So many of our adult education programs were not very successful, and many of our adult educators were not completing their programs prior to reinvention. And what we found is that many of our external adult education location sites were in places where there was a need a decade ago. And so we re-looked at the latest census data to find out where the need for those, where most of our adult educators would be, and we partnered with our nonprofits and our community-based organizations and opened up about 70 new adult education sites to help our students in those areas. And that has, I know for a fact, helped with a big part of the success that we've had in our adult education transition.
Great. So there's a related question here, I think, that sort of maybe picks up on the adult education piece, Cheryl, and actually a couple questions related to curriculum. And so the question is, what comes from Chanel Watson with Woodward Hines Education Foundation, and she's asking what portion of City College students are enrolling in remedial courses, and she wonders whether you've seen a decrease in this number since the Reinvention Initiative.
So most of our, when I first started City Colleges, we had about 90% of our students require some form of remediation. So we've totally revamped, our remedial work. We have worked to move remedial students into college credit work as quickly as possible with the appropriate support systems. We've done that through the use of co-requisites and reviewing our course sequencing. And we've also aligned remedial work more to a career choice as opposed to just general remedial work. And we've seen a 60% increase in remedial transitions as a result.
Okay, another question about curriculum comes from Catherine Kravitz, and she wants to know, do you think community college curricula should include liberal arts, general education courses?
Of course. You can't, of course, any curriculum, whether it's community college, whether it's any four-year university, of course you have to include that. I think this is another false argument. You know, we get so much into this argument about technical versus liberal arts, but they work together. We are trying to create the best rail-rounded education that we can. Our employers tell us all the time they need critical thinkers, they need problem solvers. Listen, and so although we live in a very technical world, we need liberal arts as well. They work together. They're not one and the same. So our pathways are built on both. Every single one of our pathways has a mix of both liberal arts, general education, and technical. Every single one of our programs here for the most part. So I absolutely believe that. I had it in my education, and I believe every student should have it. But I also believe we should stop the either-or argument and figure out how one complements the other and how they complement each other.
Okay, we have time for one last question, although we have many more. So this is going to be my last question for you, Cheryl, before we wrap up. And this comes from Noah Brown with Commonwealth. And it relates to employer partnerships. We've had a lot of questions about those. And he's wondering, how did you tailor your employer partnerships and new internships to fit the need of students who already have commitments to work and family? And I can imagine, Cheryl, you probably have a lot of students who have children that they're responsible for or other family members. So how did flexibility play a role in your reinvention?
So I can tell you the structured pathways played a big role in that. What we found is that although students had other responsibility, what was more of a burden to them is, you know, coming in, having someone hand them this gigantic catalog. They're trying to piece together courses that really don't fit their time schedule, and so it made it very hard. When we put our semester by semester pathways together, and we actually put in IT systems, some very sophisticated IT systems that populates this for students every semester, and so it's tailored to their choice day one. But I can tell you the other big thing that we're working on now that should be implemented is what's called block scheduling. That means that we're monitoring now students' choice and students' behavior through our pathways, and what we hope to have implemented is blocks of schedules and times that our students can choose from. So, for instance, once you have your pathway or your program of choice selected, we offer you various time slots. And you pick that time slot that best works for you, and we schedule everything else around that. And so now you have some predictability in your programs and your time to come. And then we've asked our employers to be flexible too, and they have been wonderful with being flexible with our students. So I think the structure of your system is so important in helping students navigate, and I highly, highly suggest the block scheduling and the pathways.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. This has been a fantastic conversation. We have enough questions. We could probably go for another hour, but we only budgeted an hour, and I know a lot of people are probably doing this over their lunch break, so we appreciate all the terrific questions, and just special thanks to Cheryl and to all the participants for joining us. And I want to just make a couple of notes in closing that a recording of the presentation will be available on our website by Thursday, and that's mobilitypartnership.org. We encourage you to visit our website to learn more about our work. And if you're interested in the topic of higher ed, next month's webinar will also hit on that theme, and you can find more information about next month's webinar later this week. That webinar will be April 11th, and it will feature partnership member Marta Tienda, a colleague of Cheryl's on the partnership and professor of sociology and public affairs at Princeton University. And she's going to be talking about demographic change and how closing the racial and ethnic disparities in higher ed attainment can boost economic growth. So I think that will build nicely on this conversation. We thank you all and encourage you again to visit our website, mobilitypartnership.org, for more information. And thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks for your patience at the beginning. Thank you so very much.
Okay. We'll call that a day.